Mending stories, creating a narrative identity in the Manukan diaspora community in the Netherlands. My name is Aone Van Engelenhoven. I am a member of Leiden University and I represent Associatie Traditie Lisan in Europe. This presentation is part of the sub-theme Translocation, Transformation, Transmission of Tradition at the Iconic 2020. Let's start with an overview. Every presentation has to start with an introduction. And specifically when we're dealing with an Indonesian conference, we need to thank and pay tribute to the ones who invited me, which in this case is, of course, the Ministry of Culture and Education and my colleagues of the University of Indonesia, Universitas Indonesia. Thank you very much for inviting me and providing me with the honor to talk with you about oral traditions in the diaspora. If we want to talk about this, then we need to have first some theoretical preliminaries. One of the things that I want to talk with you about is narrative functions and narrative topology. We will apply that to the Manukan diaspora community in the Netherlands, for which we first need to have a little historical background about their migration to the Netherlands, then a little bit about their ethno-linguistic composition, and finally we want to discuss very shortly the Alifuru concept. I will tell you a little bit about oral traditions in the diaspora, specifically oral traditions on the Lease Islands in Central Maluku, then a small note on narration management, and the conclusion will be about mystification, which I will explain by means of an epic of migration that I will elaborate on by 4 versions of Hina Masawaya, after which we need to have some conclusions in order to make sure that this is a real presentation. So, first let's talk about the theoretical preliminaries. I talked with you about narrative functions. So when we talk about the story, because my presentation is about storytelling, then we need to know what a story is. One definition could be that the story is the interrelation of person and location names within a single narrated frame of reference, because person and location names relate to plot patterns. A plot pattern then is what Amin Sweeney in 1987 referred to as a narrative chunk when he analyzed Malay storytelling, in which he saw that several plot patterns would reoccur in a new story. In fact, one could say that every story is a combination of narrative chunks that you can find everywhere. So we could state that a story is a set of narrative chunks that is defined by the audience. For example, the story of Little Red Riding Hood implies that the audience expects the protagonist to wear a red hood. So if I would tell the story and then say that once upon a time there was a little girl who had a yellow cap on, children probably would disagree with me and say that's not the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Stories in Nusantara in general can be sacred or can be profane, but in an oral society as the one that we have in Nusantara in general, we see that sacred stories and profane stories are on a gliding scale. You can tell a sacred story as a joke, but also you can tell profane stories very secretly, half sacredly. Okay, Now, I want to explain this by an observation by the Dutch anthropologist Jocelyn de Jong in 1937, who wrote a book on the Oirata community on Kisar Island in southwest Maluku. And when he analyzed the main myth of that community, he thought that actually these people could not really tell stories comparable to what we are looking at here. This moving picture that we see here is from Lucas Barbosa, a mathematician, who tells us that even though now we see a torus or a cookie if you want, and now we see a mug, which are two different things then, according to mathematical topology, it's the same thing. Which is something for me personally that I don't really understand. If we apply this thing of topology onto narratives, then we have something like narrative topology. In this example, the narrative topology of the Sorot stories, where we have at least three versions, one on Kisar Island with the Oirata community, and two in East Timor with the Tutuala and Latulo communities. Then we see that in the Latulo version, the protagonist only has a pen, whereas in the Tutuala version, it's more elaborate because the protagonist has a pen and the book, whereas in the Oirata version, it's most elaborate because there the protagonist has a pen, a book, and ink. And people from there would say, well, in that case, the Oirata version is the most elaborate version of all, but all of them refer to the same story. But from a Western point of view, we would say that no, we have three different stories. The Oirata version is not a version of the Sorot Malay story, it's just a different story. In an oral community like in Southwest Maluku, different stories would be seen as part of the same meta story. Okay. So if we look again at narrative topology, then one of the features are names, because names provide temporal landmarks, especially in languages as we have them in Indonesia that do not mark tense, like in English. You need to have a name to make sure with what time you're dealing with. So, for example, if we say Sukarno, we know immediately when this takes place. Narrative chunks, by the way, names are narrative chunks. They already provide plot patterns. Like in Little Red Riding Hood, the big bad wolf. Those are already little chunks that tell you a little story. Songs are also a topological feature because they provide truth landmarks. Specifically in Southwest Maluku, if you can tell a story but you don't know the song, then it is narratively not real. It's only real if you also put in the song. Songs and the names are important in the story altogether. And then we have narrative artifacts, which are something like this. On Kisar Island, we have this rock that is a comprehension aid for Oirata people to tell you the story of the arrival of the Dutch. Because in the middle of the photograph, we see a black section, which is considered by Oirata people to be left by the Dutch, which is evidence that they came here, right? Okay. So what about the Malukan community in the Netherlands? Let's do that really quickly. We provide you with a historical overview. So 45, Indonesia got independent. Then we know that from 46 to 1950, there were other states, because we had this Republik Indonesia Serikat, so it was a federation of states. One of them was the state of East Indonesia that conceded into the Republic of Indonesia in 1950. And then all of a sudden we realized that the Dutch still had their colonial army in Indonesia. So when it was disbanded in 1950, there was a problem, because you cannot disband an army abroad. So the option was to either step over to the Indonesian army, or to go back home, or if you don't want to do that, you had to come to the Netherlands. So that happened to 12,500 soldiers who were transferred from Indonesia to the Netherlands in 51 and 52. So there they come. These soldiers, it's very important for us to realize, are very young. They were in their 20s. These were young people. Okay, what is this? So this is Maluku and Timor and North Maluku, where we have, around the Banda Sea, we have about 92 different languages. In the Netherlands, however, only 2 of them survive, which is, of course, Malay or Indonesian, and a language called Iwaaf, spoken on the K Islands. The majority of the Moluccans in the Netherlands originate from the central Moluccas, so 76% is from central Maluku. Then another huge part, 21%, originates from southeast Maluku. And because they were mostly Catholics, they were immediately located in 1951 in the southeast of the country, where the majority is also Catholic. In the end, some of them left there and went up north, where they became their own group, because these were not Catholics, these were Protestants. Then we have a small group where I'm from, just 3% of Southwest Moluccans. And finally, I have to mention the Muslims who had a problem when they arrived in the Netherlands, because in the 50s, the Dutch society did not know what Muslims were. So they were located in the north, and only later they moved southwards, where they built their first mosques, and they are also about 3%, but they should be incorporated in the 76% of Central Moluccans. Okay. So we have 3 ethno-linguistic groups: Central Islanders, Southeast Islanders, and Southwest Islanders. 76% is from the central part, and the majority of them came from Saparua Island. In the Alifuru concept, however, that came up during the 60s, people did not like to talk about 3 ethno-linguistic groups. They said there was just one people. We're all Moluccans. We are not 3 different groups. We are all descendants of the Alifuru, the traditional inhabitant of Seram Island. We do not speak 92 different languages. We only speak one language. What you call different languages are just dialects. And we, as I already said, have all one origin. We all came from Seram Island, from a place called Nunusaku Mountain, which is located around here. This story, by the way, is Central Moluccan cultural heritage. It does not apply to Southeast Islanders and Southwest Islanders. So if we go back to the narrative topology thing and we talk about oral traditions in the diaspora, then how is this managed? How is narration managed? Well, actually, I already told you, as in Indonesia as well, if you want to hear oral history, or you want to have a story, then you usually go to your grandparents. That also happens here. But the problem was that the people who are now old people, who are now grandparents, were in their 20s when they arrived in the Netherlands. And when you are 20 years old, you are not really thinking in terms of a cultural heritage, specifically not in the 50s, when everyone was trying to survive. This is a very important observation. So let's talk about oral traditions on the Lease Islands then. Oral traditions on these islands and everywhere else, I think, is about remembering the past and understanding the present. So we had storytelling and kapata, which again, so kapata are chanted poems, can be used together. You can tell the story of Patimura and then add the kapata that goes with it. Or you can just do the kapata and then not tell the story, but usually you have both of them. The kapata, the chanted poem in Central Maluku, is usually about regional history, very often about clan history, and there we have a problem because that is group property. So I mentioned Patimura, but I'm not the one to tell you about Patimura because I'm not from the Matulesi clan. I'm not the one to tell you that story. The stories are sacred, and only the ones who own the story are allowed to tell you the story. And specifically in Central Maluku, the Kapata are identity markers because they belong to a village, to a negri, or to certain groups only. The main motive in storytelling in the Netherlands of the Maluku group is migration. And I want to talk with you about this epic of migration, which is in a way interesting because it's epic, but we don't have heroes there. I want to talk with you about this with a song called Hina Masawaya. And you find it in the church psalm book. But then the interesting thing is it does not have a translation. So if you take a look at the text, then we all know it's about migration, but the text, the original text, we don't know what language it is. So most people say it's from Saparua, but the majority of Central Malucans are from Saparua, right? And then some say, no, it's from Nusa Laut, which is this island. It's not in the Saparua language. I've also heard people say, well, actually, that's also not true. It's from Tulehu. Tulehu is a village on Ambon, and it has a totally different language. And someone told me that all three are totally wrong because it is originally Alune, which is spoken on Seram Island. In other words, we sing a song and we don't know what it is. This is the song, Hina Masawaya, and I want to look with you at only these colored 4 words: Hunimua, Salane, Ite, and Kibiratu. That's the only ones that I want to discuss with you, and then we're going to compare. But first, I would like to play the song for you that you can hear how it sounds. Okay, there we go. So in the version 1 from Saparua Island, I want to compare that with version 2 from D. Chayo Productions in 2011. If we compare, then already in the first sentence, we see that Hina Masawaya, that's the first sentence, is translated comparably. So in version 1, it's translated as in days gone by, and in version 2, in times gone by. That's not really very different. But if we take a look at the second line, in version 1, it says, we Alifuru came from the mountains of Honimoa, but the word Alifuru is not in the text. And in version 2, it says, we came to Honimoa on Seram. The word Seram is also not mentioned. If we go to 3, then this is the word Salane that originates from Malay Sala. That's translated as not appropriately, which, okay, I can do with that. But in the counterpart in version 2, in 3, that sentence has nothing to do with wrong or not appropriate. It's totally gone. In 4, we see that both versions talk about a house, although one would say townhouse and the other one says it's a holy house, in a place called Sepa. But in 5, we see that Kibiratu, that is translated as things in the Saparua translation, but in the Chayo translation, it is rendered as great empire, whereas the Kite, which was green, is we in version 1 and us in version 2. So let's say that's in both instances, that's still Kita. So that is the same. If we compare that with version 3 in Alune, by an Alune speaker, and version 4 by a Nusa Laut speaker, then we see something else. Then we see that the first sentence is totally different, whereas in the Alune version, we talk about the ocean water rising. In the Nusa Laut version, it's nothing about water. It's a totally different scene. In 2, we see actually that Honimoa is replaced by Nunusaku, which makes sense in the story that we just saw, that everyone should have originated from Nunusaku Mountain. In 3, we see that in version 3, in the left version, Salane is rendered by sins, which makes sense, but in the opposite sentence 3 in version 4, it does not seem related anymore. In sentence 4, at the left, we talk about a boat sailing at sea, whereas in 4, we see that that sentence is not related at all to sentence 4 and 3. And in 5, we see that indeed, in version 3, Kite is still something like us, but then Kibiratu is translated as sin, whereas in version 4, Kibiratu is translated as noble leader, which I think is related to the fact that Ratu means queen, whereas Kite is translated as one. So you see, we have one song, 4 different versions, and they hardly look alike. So our conclusions then. We saw that we were talking about names, songs, and narrative artifacts in narrative topology. Names provide plot patterns, songs relate to narrative reality, and narrative artifacts provide comprehension aids. And what we just saw with this song is there is this phenomenon of mystification, which is due to language shift, of course, because when the Malukan soldiers came in Indonesia already, they probably shifted their local language for Malay. By the way, that has been going on for a long time because the indigenous languages in Central Maluku are generally spoken by the Muslims and no longer by Christians. So we have a shift to Malay, then they come over to the Netherlands, and then in the end there is a shift from Malay to Dutch. Young Malukans hardly speak any Indonesian, they all speak Dutch. Which implies, of course, a loss of meaning. So the names don't mean anything anymore, and we saw that song means something else in a way. So if we take another look at this, then we see that the song actually became a narrative artifact. And the song is reinterpreted. Whereas originally it was a migration, or a removal if you want, from Honimua to Sepa, which is on Saparua, to Seram, so just across the strait, it's reinterpreted as going from the homeland into the diaspora. And we just saw that what happens here is that young Malukans try to unify all different ideas about origin into a single element. Thank you very much. This was my presentation. I hope it has been useful, and I wish you a lot of success in this conference, and hopefully we will see you again.